Hello again. Well, it's been really nice to know that so many of you have enjoyed my last 3 videos about the Peter Jackson Get Back film. And today I thought I would re-watch the original Michael Lindsay Hogg Let It Be film and then give some thoughts about how I think the two compare. Now, the original Let It Be film came out in 1970 and had lukewarm reception at the time, and many believe it shows the Beatles breaking up and things being pretty bad. Now, having seen Get Back and now watching the original film, you do see the original film in a totally different light because you know the context of every moment in that original film and what really happened around it. Now, from a purely cinematic point of view, it's not very good because Lindsay Hogg basically seems to have used just the film from a couple of the cameras and not all 5 that were running at the time in many cases. Lots of close-ups, particularly of Paul. I think there's too much of Paul in the film. There's too many close-ups of Paul. Even when he's not doing anything, there's just this static, you know, Paul scratching his beard and stuff like that. And it just doesn't look balanced. You want to see what all the others are doing as well. And I think that's the first reason why Let It Be was considered to be not a great film, because there's just too many shots of Paul, and it does give the narrative that Paul is the control freak because everything is about Paul in the film. That being said, in the first opening scene, you've got Ringo sat next to Paul while Paul's playing the piano. That just seems to go on forever. I mean, why have 2 minutes of faces? Because you're not even seeing Paul's playing the piano very much. When there's loads of other stuff going on, they're loading in the gear, they're setting stuff up. Why didn't they make a montage of that to float over the piano section? And again, this all goes down to my theory, and it's only a theory, that Lindsay Hogg just didn't look at all the rushes. He just got the rushes from the 2 main cameras and just stuck with that for most of it. As the film goes on, you're seeing them rehearsing numbers, and he's picked good takes mostly of those numbers being rehearsed. You know, things like Don't Let Me Down and Dig a Pony and whatever. And I Got a Feeling, of course. And that looks good. But again, he's got lots of long shots just on one person. Now, I know editing, because this is what I do for a job. I'm a video editor. That's my day job. And I know in there, editing on film was a real pain in the neck because you physically had to find the bit of film you want. You had to make sure it was in sync with the other bit of film. And then you physically had to cut it together. And I'm guessing that Lindsay Hogg's editing time was very short because I think it was a bit of a rush edit. Well, it must have been, because with all that material, he only had a year to cut the thing anyway, and back then that would have taken a long time. I mean, you know, you could take all day editing, you know, a couple of minutes of film, so to edit 80 minutes worth. So they definitely just used lots of long shots. Maybe they could have used the system that became prevalent afterwards, where you shoot everything on film, copy it to videotape, and then edit in the electronic environment. That way you can do it much quicker. But of course this was made for film, for cinema, and not for TV. So what they would have done, they'd have edited, got all the material they wanted, had it blown up to 35mm, cut it, and then that was the finished film. And that's why it looks grainy, it looks noisy, the colours look weird, because it's had this kind of double transfer, if you like. Anyhow, so we get on to from Twickenham to Apple. And the Apple material does look a lot nicer because it's in a bright white room, as is we saw on Get Back. And again, there's not much dialogue in there. And so there wasn't much dialogue in the first half, only the sort of argument with George that, as we now know, wasn't really an argument, and a few other bits of chit-chat. Into the Apple stuff, it's mostly music. In fact, I would say really the whole film is probably 90% just music and 10% chat. But because the chat doesn't make a lot of sense, and some of it's quite negative, particularly the section where Paul's talking to John about George, and it was basically the conversation that was going around about whether they did the rooftop or not, or whether they did another concert. And that, of course, puts a big negative spin on the home film because it's like Paul talking about George again. So that's kind of how Lindsay Hogg made the narrative. So if anyone's really to blame about people thinking that Let It Be was all about Paul taking over the Beatles and ending the Beatles, well, that's Michael Lindsay Hogg, because he picked the shots. He picked what was to go in. Now, when they're doing all the stuff in Apple, some of it is in the Get Back film, some of it isn't. And they've got quite long sections of the sort of more rock and roll-y numbers that they were just jamming away at. And of course, a nice long version of Dig It. Again, I think Peter Jackson just didn't want to repeat too much of what was in the original Let It Be film into his film, because the whole point of Get Back, the film, was that it was all unseen material, all new material. And that's pretty much what it did. And certainly, apart from the rooftop section, I don't think there's more than about 10 minutes at most of what was in Let It Be that's in Get Back. Then we get on to the end of the stuff at Apple, and we've probably got, I didn't have a stopwatch across it, but probably 45 minutes of the film is that stuff from Twickenham and Apple. Then we have the three, what I always used to call the promo films, but they were actually recording sessions where they do Two of Us, followed by Let It Be, followed by The Long and Winding Road. Now, the thing with those three films is, again, the shots are very long. Like on Two of Us, you've got the same shot of Paul, Ringo and George for the whole of the first verse. There's no cutaways at all. And I kind of think, well, maybe by the time they got to editing that, they just thought, we'll just slap the minimum together. And there's like odd cutaways of John's face and that. And again, all the way through the film, there's so many close-ups, you know, so many camera up the nostril shots. And I just don't like that. I'd rather see wider shots and see people doing stuff than, you know, looking up people's noses. But there again, 1969, that was a bit of a trend. If you watch any of the sort of BBC Arts programmes at the time, there's a really famous clip of The Nice doing America and Fleetwood Mac doing Oh Well on Monster Music Mash and stuff. And there's lots and lots of close-ups, so that was kind of a thing. So maybe that's what Lindsay Hogg was doing. Anyway, then we get to the rooftop section, and everybody's seen this because this stuff has been repeated a lot over the years. And a lot of people complained about the original film, oh, they didn't show the whole of it. And it's like, well, they did in essence, in that they used all the songs. But of course, some of the songs got repeated, and there were, you know, it wasn't 42 minutes of continuous music. It was probably about 30 minutes of music and 10 minutes of them, you know, retuning, whatever. So the fact that he just picked, you know, all the main tracks and did it as a montage, as a concert, that's perfectly good, perfectly acceptable as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, you got the bit with the coppers going upstairs and that, and obviously we know a lot more about that now. But no, I think for the time, I think the end, you know, the rooftop sequence is really good. And so if we look at the film now, I feel there's not much dialogue in it anyway. If they decided, actually, we'll ditch all the dialogue and it will all be just music, I think the film would have been revered in much higher regard than what it was revered in, because of the fact that the few conversations that are in there, to the untrained ear, do sound quite negative. So if you took all that out, you'd probably have a 70-minute film of just music. And if that got, say, a TV showing in, I don't know, 1970, you know, if that went out at Christmas 1970 or 71 or whenever, I think it would have been a pretty big thing, and I think it would have been much more loved than what it was, and particularly having the rooftops section at the end. So, yeah, I think Let It Be, in summing up, could have been a really good film if they'd spent more time on it. Particularly if they spent more time getting better camera angles and better shots in than the shots that they used. I mean, several examples is you've got a real close-up of someone's face, like, you know, John's face, and then it pans around to George, or the other way, I can't remember. But the pan is so long, and the actual shots at either end are really short. So you're seeing in that sort of 6-second section, 4 seconds of it is just a camera moving, and it's not very elegant, and it's not moving where you see something interesting. The whole point of doing a panning shot is that you want to see what develops, and they just didn't get that. And, you know, we're talking about, you know, these like professional film editors and professional directors, and yet they just couldn't get a basic shot right. Whereas if you go and see a film from a few years later, I mean, the obvious one is the band's Last Waltz. I mean, that is just beautiful to watch. Every single shot that Scorsese did just looks superb. And yet, you know, we had other music films around the time. I mean, Monterey Pop was 2 years earlier, and that was Pennybreaker, and that was brilliant. That was, you know, that looked really nice. And obviously Woodstock was like the real first all singing, all dancing, over the top cut music film. And with films like that, and then Let It Be comes out, and it sort of almost feels a bit like it's a student film, and it, you know, it hasn't been very well put together. Anyway, it's a really interesting thing to do. If you've got a copy of Let It Be lying around, because, you know, many of us have, you know, old bootleg VHSs or DVDs and stuff. The DVD I actually watched to do my comparison was one put together about 10 years ago by some fans on the internet, and they'd actually reused the Naga reels off the Abbey Road box set, and they redubbed the sound of the whole film and made most of it as much as they could in stereo, which made at the time, made a really nice view, because the bootleg VHS that I had of Let It Be that I bought for eBay in 2001 did have pretty ropey sound. So it was a nice thing to watch. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my little chat about what I thought about the original Let It Be. As you have done in my other videos, particularly the last one, if you want to talk about any of this, leave comments below. There's been some interesting conversations on the last one. And please like and subscribe to my channel if you want to see other content. There's quite a few other bits of Beatles stuff that I've done, and I've actually now got a playlist on the channel with all the Beatles stuff all together. So take a look at that if you can. Anyway, that's the last bit for me on this subject for a little while. And I'll be back soon with another video about something else.